5 signs you're actually happiest when you're alone. All right, let me ask you something. Have you ever felt this strange sense of peace when you're by yourself? Not just the absence of noise, but a deep calm, almost like the world finally quiets down and you can actually hear your own thoughts. Now, I know what you're thinking. Society has trained us to believe that happiness comes from others, from connection, from being surrounded by people who care about us. But what if I told you that, for many of us, the deepest sense of joy, of contentment, actually comes when we're alone? You see, solitude is often misunderstood. Most people associate being alone with loneliness, but these two states couldn't be more different. Loneliness is the feeling of isolation, of wanting company but not having it. Solitude, on the other hand, is chosen. It's the space where we can be free from the constant demands of the outside world and where we can finally focus on our inner world. But why is it that some of us find this solitude so comforting? Why do we reach our happiest moments in those quiet, undisturbed spaces? Let's break this down with some deep insights and practical wisdom. I'm going to give you 5 signs that you might be happiest when you're alone, and each one will reveal a profound truth about the human condition. The first sign, you find clarity in solitude. Think about this. When was the last time you made a major decision in the middle of a crowd with noise all around you? Probably never. Decisions, especially the ones that shape our lives, require space to think, to reflect, to weigh options. When you're alone, that's when your mind is free from outside influence, when you can hear your own voice, unobstructed by the opinions or expectations of others. In these moments, you're not just making decisions, you're discovering what you truly want. But why is this clarity so important? Here's where it gets philosophical. The ancient Greeks believed that to know oneself was the greatest achievement one could strive for. Socrates famously said, "Know thyself," and this wisdom still holds today. How can we possibly know ourselves if we're constantly surrounded by others, influenced by their desires, their needs, their expectations? Solitude allows us to strip away those external layers and see the core of who we are. A deep question for you: when was the last time you sat in silence and truly asked yourself, what do I want? Not what your family wants, or your friends, or society, but what you want. If the answer isn't immediately clear, maybe that's because you haven't given yourself enough solitude to listen.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound spiritual lesson.
As we move into the second sign, it's essential to recognize that clarity leads to something even deeper: authenticity. When you're alone, there's no one to impress, no one to put on a show for. You don't have to conform to anyone's expectations. You can be exactly who you are without fear of judgment. And this is the second sign: you feel more like yourself when you're alone. In social situations, we often wear masks. We adapt to the environment. We shift our behavior to fit in, to be liked, to avoid conflict. But in solitude, those masks come off. You can be weird, you can be quiet, you can be messy or organized, thoughtful or absent-minded. In that space, you reconnect with the unfiltered version of yourself. Here's something to think about. Do you feel relieved when you're alone? If the answer is yes, it might be because you're not performing anymore. You're not bending yourself to fit someone else's mold. And in those moments, there's a kind of happiness that comes not from external validation, but from internal acceptance. But there's more to it than just feeling authentic. Solitude also allows us to tap into a deeper, more profound source of creativity. And this is the third sign: your creativity flourishes when you're alone. Have you ever noticed that your most original ideas come to you when you're alone? Maybe it's in the shower, or while you're on a walk by yourself, or late at night when the world is asleep. Why is that? It's because creativity requires freedom from distraction, freedom from judgment. When we're surrounded by people, we're often afraid to think outside the box, afraid to express ideas that might seem too unconventional. But in solitude, those fears fall away. Your mind is free to wander, to explore new possibilities, to make connections that might seem strange to others, but make perfect sense to you. Let me ask you this: when was the last time you had a truly original idea? If you haven't had one in a while, it might be because you haven't given yourself enough space to think. Creativity, like clarity and authenticity, thrives in solitude. It's in those quiet moments that your mind is free to play, to experiment, to dream. But solitude does something even more profound. It doesn't just spark creativity, it also helps us confront our deepest fears. And this leads us to the fourth sign you grow stronger when you're alone. The strength found in solitude, you see. Solitude isn't just a place where creativity and clarity flourish, it's also where we confront ourselves. And this is where things get a little more intense. The fourth sign that you're actually happiest when you're alone is that you grow stronger in solitude. Now, this might sound counterintuitive at first. After all, we often think of growth as something that happens through interaction with others, through relationships, through challenges that society throws at us. But here's the truth: real growth, the kind that fundamentally changes who you are, happens when you're alone with yourself. Why? Because when you're alone, there's no one to distract you from your own thoughts, from your own insecurities, from the things that scare you the most. There's a kind of raw honesty that comes with solitude. You can't run away from yourself. You can't drown out your fears with chatter or activity. You have to face them head on. And here's where the strength comes in. When you're alone, you start to realize that you can handle these fears, and that they're not as overwhelming as they seem. Maybe they're big, yes, but they're not insurmountable. You begin to understand that you have the capacity to sit with discomfort, to face difficult emotions, and to come out the other side. And that realization, that's where true strength comes from. Let me ask you a deep question. When was the last time you sat with your fears instead of avoiding them? Think about it. Most of us spend so much time running from our fears through distractions, through constant social engagement, through busyness, that we never stop to actually confront them. But what if, in solitude, you allowed yourself to feel the full weight of those fears? How might that change you? Here's an important point: solitude teaches us resilience. When you're alone, you have no choice but to rely on yourself. There's no one else to lean on, no one to offer you solutions or comfort. And while that might sound daunting, it's also incredibly empowering. Because when you realize that you can stand on your own 2 feet, that you can face your fears and your struggles without needing someone else to rescue you, that's when you tap into a deep well of inner strength. But solitude doesn't just make you stronger, it also makes you more self-reliant. And this is a subtle but profound distinction. Strength is the ability to face adversity, but self-reliance is the confidence that you can navigate life's challenges without constantly needing external support. It's the knowledge that you have everything you need within yourself to handle whatever comes your way. Think about it: how many times have you depended on others to make decisions for you, to validate your choices, to give you permission to pursue your dreams? Solitude strips away that dependence. It forces you to trust yourself, to become your own source of guidance and wisdom, and that's a powerful place to be. But let's not romanticize solitude, because even though it brings clarity, creativity, strength, and self-reliance, it's also deeply challenging. One of the hardest parts of being alone is that you're faced with your own thoughts, and sometimes those thoughts aren't pretty. Sometimes solitude brings up emotions you'd rather not deal with: regret, anxiety, sadness. And that's why the fifth sign that you're happiest when you're alone is that you've learned to find peace with yourself. This is perhaps the most important sign of all. If you're truly happiest in solitude, it's because you've made peace with who you are. You've stopped running from your own mind, from your own history, from your own emotions. You've learned to sit with yourself, flaws and all, and be okay with it. Here's something to consider. Can you sit in total silence, alone, for an extended period without reaching for a distraction? If the thought of that makes you uncomfortable, it might be because you haven't yet made peace with yourself. But if you can do it, if you can sit alone, in stillness, and feel a sense of calm wash over you, then you've reached a level of self-acceptance that few people ever do. And this peace, it's not about liking everything about yourself. It's not about being free from flaws or insecurities. It's about accepting those things, understanding that they're part of who you are, and choosing to be okay with that. It's about recognizing that you are enough, exactly as you are, without needing other people to fill in the gaps. So, solitude becomes this incredible space for growth, not just because it forces you to confront your fears, but because it allows you to reach a place of self-acceptance. And when you reach that place, when you find peace within yourself, you realize that you don't need constant external validation to be happy. You don't need others to tell you that you're okay, you know it, deep down. In solitude, you find that happiness isn't something that comes from the outside. It's something that already exists within you, waiting to be discovered. The quiet joy of inner fulfillment. Now, if you've come this far, you might already be starting to see solitude in a different light. It's not just a break from the chaos, it's where we find clarity, strength, and peace. But there's another layer to this, something even deeper. Solitude brings us closer to inner fulfillment, a kind of quiet joy that goes beyond the fleeting happiness we often chase in the outer world. Here's the thing: many of us spend our lives pursuing external sources of happiness. We look for it in relationships, achievements, material possessions, or the approval of others. And sure, these things can bring moments of joy, but they're often temporary. As soon as we get what we want, the satisfaction fades, and we're left searching for the next thing. It becomes a cycle, always chasing, never truly content. But what if the deepest, most lasting form of happiness isn't something we have to chase? What if it's something that's already within us, waiting to be uncovered? And this is the next sign that you're happiest when you're alone. You find joy in your own company. Think about that for a second. When you're alone, and the noise of the world fades away, what's left? It's just you and your thoughts, and the present moment. If you've learned to find peace with yourself, this is where a quiet, steady joy can emerge. It's not the same as the excitement we get from external achievements. It's softer, more enduring. It's the kind of joy that comes from simply being, rather than constantly doing. But how do we find this joy? How do we cultivate it? The answer lies in presence. When we're alone, we're given the rare opportunity to be fully present with ourselves. There's no one else demanding our attention, no distractions pulling us away from the moment. We can simply exist in the here and now. And it's in this presence that we begin to experience true contentment. Let me ask you a deep question. When was the last time you felt completely content doing nothing? No phone, no social media, no distractions, just you, sitting with your own thoughts. If that sounds difficult, it's probably because we've been conditioned to constantly seek stimulation. But when you learn to be present with yourself, you'll start to notice the small, subtle joys of life: the quiet of the morning, the feeling of the sun on your skin, the rhythm of your own breath. This is the kind of joy that solitude offers, a joy that's not dependent on anything external. It's the joy of being fully at peace with where you are and who you are in this very moment. And once you've experienced this, you realize something profound. Happiness isn't something you need to find outside yourself. In solitude, you come to understand that the constant search for validation, for excitement, for approval, it's all unnecessary. You already have everything you need to be happy right here within you. And when you realize that, a whole new world opens up. You're no longer chasing after things to fill a void. You're content simply being. This kind of inner fulfillment is rare. Most people never find it because they're too busy looking for happiness in all the wrong places. But if you're happiest when you're alone, it's because you've tapped into this well of joy that's always been within you. You've realized that solitude is not a space of lack, but a space of abundance, of self-discovery, inner strength, and deep, lasting joy. The freedom of self-sufficiency. So, here's the final truth that solitude reveals: freedom. When you're happiest alone, it's because you've discovered the kind of freedom that most people spend their whole lives searching for. It's the freedom from needing anyone else to complete you, to validate you, or to make you feel whole. You see, the world often tells us that we need others to be happy, that fulfillment comes from relationships, from being surrounded by people who love us, or from the status we gain through social connections. And while relationships can certainly enrich our lives, there's a profound freedom that comes when you realize you don't need them to be happy. This is the final sign you're self-sufficient in your happiness. Let's break this down. When you're alone, you are the sole source of your joy, your peace, your contentment. You don't rely on anyone else's approval or affection to feel good about yourself. And that's incredibly liberating. It means that no matter what happens in your relationships, your job, or the external world, your inner happiness remains intact. You've built a foundation that is unshakable. A deep question for you: what would your life look like if you stopped depending on others for your happiness? Think about how much energy we spend trying to earn love, respect, or validation from others. Now imagine being free from that, free to live exactly as you are, knowing that your happiness is entirely in your hands. This doesn't mean you shut people out or avoid relationships. In fact, when you're self-sufficient, your relationships can become even more meaningful. Why? Because you're no longer seeking something from others, you're simply sharing your life with them. You're not afraid of being alone because you know you're happiest that way. And that kind of confidence, it's magnetic. It draws people in, but not out of need, out of mutual respect and genuine connection. In the end, solitude teaches us the most important lesson of all: true happiness doesn't depend on anyone or anything outside of ourselves. It's something we cultivate within through clarity, strength, peace, and self-sufficiency. And when you've found that, you're not just happy in solitude, you're free.